Welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast, where we're joined by your hosts, Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. In each episode, we'll be sharing valuable insights and tips to help you turn your NDIS business into a profitable venture. So whether you're just starting out or looking to take your business to the next level, you've come to the right place. Let's stop surviving and start thriving.
G'day everybody and welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast. I'm Paul and I'm here today with Tania, and today we're chatting with Dr. Warren Harmer from the Business Plan Company. Say hi, guys.
Hey, how are you?
Very
Hi,
good,
Paul.
very good.
Thank you. I'm really excited for today's episode. We have Warren joining us, and I'm excited to talk all things business models because I must say this is a question that I get asked all the time. What is the business models in NDIS? Can you make a profit as an NDIS provider if you're doing it the right way? And what does that look like? And there's really no one better to speak about this than you, Warren, because you work with NDIS providers all the time, figuring out business plans and looking at forecasting, having a look at what the market is. You've done some amazing business plans for me in multiple of my businesses. And so we're really excited to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Before we begin, Warren, do you want to give us a little bit of background about you personally and about your business?
Sure thing. So I kind of fell into consulting by accident. Originally, I was a scientist many years ago. And then after having a small business of my own, I sort of fell into business planning and consulting. That was about 25 years ago now. And over that time, I worked with hundreds of businesses. But for the last 10 years, I've specialised in business planning. So I really come from small business and I'm passionate about small business. So that's the space we operate in. We do a lot of work with startups. We do plans and projects for investment, for migration, for grants and tenders. And there are all types of businesses and everything from import, export, service, plumbing, accounting, online, tech apps. I mean, you name it, we've done it. And I guess as the NDIS has grown over the last 5 or 6 years particularly, lots of our clients have been NDIS providers. So we've probably done 400 or 500 projects now for NDIS providers. And that's for brand new businesses that are just starting off and don't really know what they're doing. And also for operating providers as well. We're quite often called in to do the plans when there's an audit coming up. But what's been great about that is that having seen so many NDIS providers over the years, we see how they all operate, what the trends are, and we get to see inside a lot of those businesses to sort of see what works and what doesn't work with all the complexity that goes along with that.
Oh, that's really cool. I mean, having all that insight and be able to look at all these different businesses, how they're operating, how they want to start up. I'm sure you've had some really interesting conversations, especially with what people are wanting to do and what they can do. I wonder if you could let us know a bit about the different types of business models that are usually used by NDIS providers.
Sure thing. So from what we see, they kind of fall into a number of different categories. And I'm not sure that the providers necessarily kind of set out with a clear idea of, okay, I'm going to follow this particular business model.
Yeah.
But what I've sort of broadly categorized into the ones that we've seen over the years, and how the different management is different for each of those kinds of businesses. And look, and I'll say from the outset, there's no hard and fast boundaries. It's not kind of one clear, distinct type, but they do fall into these categories. There's a fair bit of overlap. And probably no two businesses are the same. So a NDIS provider can nominate a whole range of different registration groups. So you could get some that are doing some and then some that are doing another type of business model as well. But these ones are the kind of the broader categories, I guess, that we see. So I guess the number one, and I've got 4 of them. Number one is where the provider is delivering direct support services to the participant. And it's really just about delivering those services, support services.
Yeah.
So they're not providing an accommodation site. Generally speaking, that those services are delivered at the client's site. There's a few exceptions with that. Sometimes we take clients who've maybe operated day centres. But in general, they're not providing the accommodation site. Now, the complexity of the services that they offer does vary, but it's probably generally the less complex. Sometimes we have some clients that include nursing in that, and then other times support coordination. There's a small number of businesses that include that, or they just do support coordination. Now, many of the businesses that we work with are kind of brand new small startups, and this is the business model that they generally follow. They've got participants, they've got a certain number of hours of types of services that they're going to deliver, and they go and deliver them for the most part on site where the participant is. That can be their home or could be community as well. So most of the entry-level type of providers that are newer to business or newer to NDIS, because we do have some clients who see the NDIS as an opportunity, but they haven't worked in the field before. They tend to start off in this particular business model. Overall, they're a bit lower cost to set up, and they're probably a bit lower risk because when they provide the services, they are directly linking the cost of providing that service, which is for the most part wages and salaries, to the number of hours that are delivered. Now, sometimes or quite often, the new NDIS provider is providing some of those services themselves, so that helps to offset the risk because they're not paying all wages or some wages, and so as a brand new business, they can go and actually provide some of the services themselves. So that's probably one of the most common ones that we see, particularly for brand new providers that are just kind of starting off.
Yeah, cool.
The second one, I guess, would be supported independent living. So most of the time, the accommodation is provided by the NDIS provider. Not always, but most of the time. Some of these, under this kind of category, they might do respite as well. The support services that they're delivering are not really completely dissimilar to number one, but a lot of the time the care can be more complex and the businesses are more complex to operate. So you probably need a bit more experience to be able to manage a bigger team. Sometimes the team is operating around the clock. There's obviously more ongoing costs that are not linked to the wages. The industrial relations, there's more to consider with that because you might have people working at different times and staying on site and the like. So there's probably a bit more complexity around that. So I would say that the risk for this business model is probably a little bit higher because the ongoing costs are bigger. You've got more staff. And something that we've seen very occasionally with our clients is that the participants' plan may change sometimes, or maybe they don't have all of the rooms in their property occupied. We've had providers before that had changes to the participants' plan and they were providing the service, and then also all of a sudden they didn't get as much as part of the plan. And so therefore they're actually losing money on that particular participant. So there's a bit more risk involved in actually operating. But if you look at overall revenues of NDIS provided businesses, the difference with the ones that are doing supported independent living and not is huge. Like the revenues skyrocket once they're doing supported independent living. And that's just to do with the sheer volume of hours. So, if you've got a participant that's doing 20 hours a week or 4 hours a week, and then all of a sudden you've got somebody that you're providing services 24 hours a day, and that can often be more than one support person at once, then the revenues skyrocket. So that's the big advantage of doing supported independent living is that the revenues go up a lot.
Yeah, I guess that also highlights that issue with like risk as well. Like the more risk, the more you're likely to be running a higher needs business as opposed to something as agile as independent support worker, for instance.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
so typically what we see is that people who are doing civil, there may be operators that have been going a bit longer, or maybe they have worked in the industry. So we just worked with a client in New South Wales, and the three founders of the business had worked in civil houses for a number of years. So they knew what they were doing. If you was just starting off and you were not familiar, obviously there's higher risk with that because it's complexity of care and it's a bigger team that you need and the costs that go along with all of that.
Yes.
Third business model, which is definitely from the clients that we see is much smaller, is SDA, Specialised Disability Accommodation. That really is quite a different business model because it's to do with constructing properties. it's much more complex. The whole process is much more involved. It's time consuming. NDIS has a lot of compliance, but this is obviously a very specialized type of compliance. These are longer-term businesses with returns that can take months and years to materialize. And you definitely need more specialized knowledge and access to capital. So a project that we did recently, the guy wanted to specialize in SDA only, and he was looking at investments of north of 600, 800,000 per property to set it up. So you need access to capital to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. I'd say the categories that I've spoken about today is the most risky because there's a fairly high investment. When you're creating the properties, you're building the properties, obviously you'll need to predetermine the category of accommodation that's going to be provided, and that's in advance of it being completed. The well-organised operators that we've worked with have good connections within the industry, but there's potential there for a mismatch. You could have a property where somebody doesn't have funding to be able to come and live in that property, so there's risk for that. And I'd say most of the SDA clients that we worked with have a history in construction of some sort, or project managers, or got some kind of connection. So that's the third one. And then, so the fourth one that we see, the kind of more specialised services where the companies provide services but maybe NDIS is one of their services. And so, for example, allied health, we've had a few clients where they provided a suite of allied health services. Could be physio, could be OT, could be behaviour support. We've worked with psychologists before. So they're operating that business, and then NDIS becomes an opportunity for them where they can build a really good client base. And sometimes NDIS can then occupy quite a big part of their business, but they're externally accredited to be able to provide that. Equipment suppliers could be another one. And so that business model, if you're not one of those providers already, then obviously that's not available to you. But they do operate and provide services within the NDIS framework.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing hearing you break it down that way, because it's very similar to personas that I've put together on different segments. So the last group you're talking about is known, at least I know it in my head, as ancillary. So they're the ancillary providers. So you've got equipment supplies, but I've done a lot of work with people like bed companies and chemists. I think I registered chains full of chemists. And they only work with people with disability because they work with the whole segment of the community, which 20% of have a disability. So they have businesses that aren't NDIS, but you're right, it is a big opportunity to be a provider in that space and to target and have marketing around that specifically to enhance more people with disability to use those services that are already being offered.
I mean, I mentioned a psychologist there, and I've got one particular client in mind who had been struggling for years working under the Medicare system, but had always seen NDIS as a potential opportunity. And once we sorted out her marketing, then it became a much bigger part of her business. And she really enjoyed the work. It was and had huge benefits for the participants that she was working with.
Yeah, I might just recap to make sure that I've got it right. So the 4 models that you spoke of, the first one is pretty disability support work. It's care work. It is the independent support worker type of, I guess it's where independent support workers can graduate to running their own business, or it could be an easy entry point for people into the NDIS sector because the entry level is quite low. There's no qualification requirements. And you said that the risks are quite low because it is really just hours. And if you're able to deliver those hours yourself, you have a little risk of other overheads.
That's right. But you're probably a bit more. But there's probably a limitation. It's probably a bit more limited on how fast you could grow.
Yeah, because you have to find participants, and I find that most of my clients who start off doing support work, I think everyone starts off doing support work. After a while, when they have other services, they actually reassess and go, actually, the care work isn't as profitable or doesn't have the margins because you have to pay staff 4-hour shift under shads of warden. Each participant might only have 2 hours, so you have to then geographically get them close together to be able to have those efficiencies. Which becomes
and then that's it. Non-billable time creeps in pretty fast. under that model.
Yeah. And then the second model is SIL, supported independent living. And I agree with everything that you said, actually. I think that it is definitely higher risk. It really comes down to those vacancy rates and how many people. So my understanding of the SIL model, and I'm learning this in a project I'm working on, I'm heavily involved with SIL at the moment, is it's all the funding is worked out on having 3 people in that home. And so because each 24 hours, there's 3 lots of 8 hours, and every participant is given 8 hours of funding. So if they're given 8 hours of funding, you need 3 people to make 24 hours of care. And if you don't have that, then you break even at about 2 participants, and you have 1 person in a home, you're kind of in arrears. Is that generally how you see it working?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and look, and the thing is that everybody's plan is so different. I mean, when we do projections for a new business, you're trying to come up with the best estimate of what somebody's budget is going to be, but they just vary enormously. And so there's this huge amount of variation from participant to participant. So, you're quite right there. The opportunity is there, but you just need to be aware of the ratios that you're talking about, because you can blindly just say, okay, well, SIL's going to be great. It's a great business opportunity, but if something doesn't work out, then you could be losing money at the same rate that you hoped you were going to be making it.
Yeah. And so clients who I've been talking with, their rule of thumb is if you've got 3 people in a home, you make 15 grand a month with 3 in the home. You break even at 2 and you lose 15 grand a month with 1 in the home. And so what seems to be a good model there is if you've got vacancies, it is around how do you utilize that space. So can you use short-term accommodation in that vacant room? Can you do respite in that vacant room? And can you use it for other schemes outside of NDIS? So a lot of my clients, there's a lot of different schemes in every state, but I've been working with still in Victoria recently. And there's a hospital leaver scheme in aged care where it's kind of when they want to get them out of the hospital, but they're not ready to go home, they go into SIL homes and they could be there for 3 or 4 months. And so if you can be part of other schemes, you can then supplement those empty spaces or vacancies, I suppose, with other rates. I guess the only thing to be aware of there is if you've got 2 permanent people in a SIL home, what is it? How does it affect their experience bringing these other people in? How disruptive is that? And will that cause a long-term participant to want to leave because of the transitory nature of having different people in that home regularly?
Absolutely.
I do think,
so that's still,
especially after that conversation we had with those few SIL providers we had on our podcast a little while ago, I think there really needs to be that definition between, is this a transaction or are we actually providing a home for these people? And the 2 ways of looking at really qualify how well that goes onwards as well.
Yes.
So understanding that.
In an ideal world, those things should be the same.
Yes.
In an ideal world. Somebody's living happily in a home should be the most profitable, you would hope.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the other point that you raised there around SIL is around the bigger teams, because I see that is where the money leaks out of the bucket. It is not utilizing staff and overstaffing or understaffing. And this flex of, do we have full-time staff, casual staff, contract staff, and the very big differences that those hourly rates make on the bottom line. If you've got all contractors at a higher hourly rate, it does affect the cash flow quite a lot, where if you had full-time staff, that works a lot better, it's more consistent, but you've got a risk there that potentially you might not have the hours for those full-time staff. So I think that the bigger teams, one of my clients in Melbourne does a 1-on-3 support model, and they, I think, have maybe 15 homes, but they have about 300 staff. And so the complexity of their service, because of the high needs and the large number of staff, even though it's a small number of participants, the business, at least on paper, I'm not working in the business, but on paper, it looks really staff heavy. And I understand that those staff are needed, but it's not like support work where you're looking at a ratio where you have maybe you know, let's say 10 participants, you might only have 3 staff. SIL kind of flips that model where if you have 3 SIL homes or even, 3 SIL participants, you might actually have 10 staff for 3 participants. The ratio works in the other direction.
Indeed. Look, and I guess amongst all of this, if I can just comment on care quality, the thing that I very often hear with new NDIS providers starting off is that they've worked in the industry and they say, well, the care quality has suffered, the places that I'm working, we just feel like a number. And then I'm going to do it differently. And the question I always ask them is, well, how do you scale that? Because the places that you're working in probably started off like you. And so I think it's and I don't have an answer to this, but it really is the conundrum of building those teams, because you need people there. I mean, you need pairs of hands, and having contractors in there on occasion, you have to do it because you just don't have enough. But care quality goes down, and then you end up back in the same. So, like for the company that can figure that out, look, because the care quality and taking care of the team actually then means retention is better. So it's if you can figure that out, I think then you've probably got a very competitive advantage.
Yeah, and I think that is where providers have the point of difference, is that they have a really great staff culture, and that seems to drive both participant engagement and retention of staff equals retention of participants. When frontline staff are intimately providing supports for people, they are providing life-saving, they're there, they're showering them, they're grooming them, they're getting them ready for work, they're there every single day of their life, 24 hours a day. The front line workers are more important, I think, than in any other job, because of the supports that they're creating. So I think getting that right is actually the silver bullet. It is just, how do you do that on scale? How do you do, you can do that in 1 or 2 homes because you can have a really tight knit group, but it's that scaling piece of how then do we go from 2 homes to 10 homes, 10 homes to 100 homes without losing that. Without losing the ability to keep an eye on the company culture and have that actually embedded all the way through. It's quite a slow process to do that.
Yeah.
For SDA, you spoke about this being the most risky based on the investment, and I think I agree with that as well. I think it is definitely a long-term game. It's not something that you can go in there to make a quick dollar. You've got millions of dollars invested in the first instance, and it can be absolute years before you get any return on investment. My personal opinion is that SDA should be only done by professionals. It shouldn't be other providers who have done other things deciding to go into this as well. I think it should be specialty. I think the same with specialist support coordination as well.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be separate. It needs to be, this is someone's home, hopefully for their life. I think it really needs to be separate from every other registration area and group, and it shouldn't be something that's trying to do everything. And when I'm working with SDA providers, I'm constantly saying, stay in your lane. Don't do SIL. Don't do anything else, not even home modifications. Don't do anything else. Stay in your lane and do SDA and do it really well. And let the care providers do SIL. And I'm trying to tell SIL providers the same thing, because I think that conflict of interest of doing both is real. And you don't want someone to feel insecure in their own home. You want them to feel like this is their forever home, because it's being, in most cases, specifically built for them and their needs.
Just on that one, Tania, I've had a chance to sort of consult with a few groups of people who are in the process of SDA, and it's amazing that they didn't realize the number of concerned parties involved in it. Like when it comes down to it, there are the builders, there's the investors, there's the provider, then there's the participant, and then there's the SIL provider, and making that whole community of businesses work is another level of business development in itself, like getting those people in a room, understanding what's happening. So I think there's people that have, as you said, trying to do too much. And I think you're really on the spot there with about just to stay in that lane and make that work, because it's very good, but you've got to really know what you're doing there.
Yeah, and also, it is actually a requirement in most states and territories that an SDA provider is actually a real estate agent, because their role is actually a property manager. And so I think a lot of people miss that they need to be accredited. I think it's all states except for one or two, and I can't tell you which ones. But I've been doing all the SDA conferences and hearing all the assessors speak, and I think I've been to 4 or 5 now, and I learned something at each one. But that was a big takeaway from me, because it's not embedded in the standards. It's a state-based rule. So really, that makes a lot of sense. Me, I always thought the SDA provider built the house. That was my assumption. But actually, that's not correct either. The SDA provider is actually the property manager. They assemble the builder. They assemble the investors. Maybe the builder's done that. They work with the sale provider, and they bring all of that together to manage this property. Similar to if they were, the government was building a hospital, and you would have a property manager of that hospital that was managing the services. That is kind of the job of an SDA provider. So if they haven't worked in even commercial real estate where they're managing multiple parties, I think there's room there that could be done really badly. And that they might not engage the right SIL providers. They might not know what to look for. They might not partner with the right builders. They might not go to the right design standards and get the right assessors involved and have those conversations. And I think it could easily go quite badly. And also having mum and dad investors makes me really nervous as well. You really don't want, I can just see, and I heard that there is the first ever, what do they call it when multiple people sue? Class action. There's a first ever class action on a provider that's happening, I believe, at the moment, where mum and dad investors were promised X returns, and it's not even going to be possible. Yeah. And as a result, this big SDA provider is going through a class action. So we don't need that. We don't need that in the NDIS. We don't need to be tarnished with that brush. We need people to stay in their lanes and do their part really well. So yeah, I think that's my view on SDA. Is there anything else that you've seen from the SDA perspective, Warren, that you think we should discuss?
I don't think so, but you can see you're just talking about the investors there, because quite often when we're talking with the SDA providers, the touting of the return on investment is because a lot of the time they're coming from that either construction or development or investor world, so that is sort of front and center. And I think not always, if they're new to it, not really understanding complexity and timelines. It's not as simple as constructing the property and then the market's going to come to you, because it's, there really needs to be that match there with what the funding is available for that particular person in the location that they want to live. Yeah.
And then we've kind of touched on your fourth model being ancillary. I really like that. That's always it's a large proportion of the clients that I've worked with in the registration side. And mostly they're verified, so it's a low entry point for them. It's a year audit every 3 years.
Can you just explain that process? Obviously, it's slightly different for that category. The process of becoming a provider, verification versus registration, right?
Certification. Yeah. So it's quite different. Verification's only every 3 years, and it's against 4 standards. So it's only against human resources, complaints, risk management, which is basically insurances, and incident management. So only 4 standards. And it's about $800 to $1,200 every 3 years. If you compare that with certified, a certified audit is every 18 months. It's 24 standards that it begins at. And it can go up to 100 standards, and you're looking at $2,500 to $5,500 as a starting point. So they're not comparable. They're not similar processes at all. The application is the only thing that is similar. From that point onwards, it's very different. Verification gets approved a lot quicker, lower entry point, and that's really because they have those, because they're ancillary, the risk is lower. But also, most of them do have other professional bodies, as you said. So they have APRA, or they have SPA, or they have OT Australia, or they have, some other industry body, as well as a 3, 4, 5, 6 year qualification in the space. So they're seen as lower risk.
Yeah. Thank
It's
you.
similar. I don't know if you've been following the aged care rollout of the new at-home care support standards, but they're doing a similar 3-tiered model, which seems really similar, with the lowest level, I believe, not needing audit, and then levels 2 and 3 having different audit processes that seem very similar to that.
Okay.
But I digress. So it was really interesting to go through those 4. I think that makes a lot of sense. From your experience, what are the common mistakes that NDIS providers are making when they're deciding on a business model or they're entering the scheme for the first time?
I guess kind of mistakes so I'll categorize them, I guess, mistakes in planning and then mistakes in operating. As we talk about these particular business models and then the challenges, the pros and cons for each of them, you can pretty easily see that people who are aspiring to be providers could easily be a mismatch. Whether you've got the skills, whether you've got the budget, whether you've got the time. So going into one of those that doesn't match your skills and experience, I'd say would be something that is reasonably common. I think the kind of the main sources of that would be people who are coming in from outside the industry. So they probably don't know. And then you might get someone who comes in and says, okay, well, I have no experience, but I'm going to start a civil house. Or no experience, but I'm going to get into SDA. And so you can see there's going to be challenges. They might be successful, but you can see pretty soon there's probably going to be challenges with that, just because in terms of their ability to get that business going and do it well, it's going to be harder. I mean, as I mentioned at the start, we do a lot of plans for lots of different types of businesses. NDIS is probably the most heavily compliance focused of all of those. And so I can see with clients that we work with that when they're first starting off, they're just completely daunted, because when they're going through, they get a long list of documents that they need to provide, not only a business plan that we do, but business continuity plans and a whole range of other things depending on the auditor, and they're completely overwhelmed. So, going into it and having no experience for that, they can be drowning. They can be drowning pretty quickly. Other mistakes in the planning side of it is thinking that the market is big and it's growing, and so the business is automatically going to be successful. It's just not the case. There is a massive opportunity there, but like any industry, a well-run business with good marketing, with high-quality services is essential, and you just can't assume that you're going to be rising with the tide, because lots of businesses don't end up like that.
Yeah.
I'd say taking on too much and kind of being too ambitious around the types of services and how fast you're going to grow is very common. So say, for example, we were talking to a new provider the other day. They haven't even been through the audit yet. They're already talking about having CIL and SDA, within the first 12 months. I mean, that sounds good in theory. They're very ambitious, good for you. But there's a whole lot of complexity that goes along with that. So if you're going to be doing 4 SDA properties in the next year, well, do you have the funding for that? Are you able to actually deliver it? Who's on the team? And so all the cascading questions that come out of that, which a lot of the time they haven't addressed, and that's just inexperience. I think one of the things in planning is that they think that social media is going to generate them lots of clients. It doesn't. Not researching the market. I mean, the great thing about NDIS is that there is a lot of data. There's annual reports, there's an NDIS demand map, and that's not the case for every industry. But with NDIS, there's actually a lot available. You can go online, and in 5 minutes, you can see how many providers there are within 10 kilometers of your postcode. It's fantastic. The amount of information is out there. So, you need to look at it and see what's actually going on. It's a big market, but it's really dynamic, and it's really competitive and getting more competitive all the time. And then I think they also then will get into the business, and they might have done that at the start, usually because we help them to do it as part of the business planning, but then they never do it again. So that's a mistake, to not kind of go back to the market and say, okay, well, that's what I thought at the start. I now have some better information. Let's go back and look at the market to see where we sit now that I've been trading for 6 months or 12 months and I've got some real trading results to go on. And I'd say one of the big things about operating businesses is kind of really understanding the profits and how to optimize those. So a lot of people get into NDIS because they were support workers themselves have been in the sector, maybe they've been in hospitals or nursing or allied health, something like that. A lot of those previous experiences don't include much on managing a business or managing finances. So it's not uncommon for us to see clients, who are operating 2, 3, 4 years, multi-million-dollar revenues, and sometimes breaking even or sometimes losing money because they just don't really know how to manage the financials of the business. And maybe they've just spent too much, they've got too many levels of management, or not tracking the performance of their staff enough. So just the term you used before sums it up perfectly, Tania. Tania, the bucket is leaking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of those things are things that I have experienced. I think people, I really feel, so I don't know if you follow me on LinkedIn, Warren, but I've just started, I've just been accepted to do a PhD to have a look at the problems of NDIS providers. Thank you. So I'll be Dr. Tania one day like you. But yeah, so I'm actually going to spend however many years of the next lot of my life looking at this, because I really can't figure out how it can be so challenging for NDIS providers. Like, I come from an education background, and before that, childcare centres that all have a lot of government regulation. And in a childcare centre, as a mother of a child, you don't know they're going through audit. As a staff member, sometimes you don't know they're going through audit because it's so well run by management. In an RTO, the students sometimes know, but it doesn't impact them. Staff know it's a little bit stressful, but it's generally quite well organised. But then you look at an NDIS provider and it is really obvious when they're going through audit because everything else stops. Everything stops in their business, and it really does affect business. And I really want to be able to create a framework to have a look at these other schemes like childcare, RTOs, and I'm sure there's plenty of others that work with small to medium businesses, and figure out what is a framework. How do we actually create capacity in people to be able to interface with regulation? And I don't mean just get through audit. I mean, actually, for me, quality is the basis that you build to create a structure and a business that you can scale and can be sustainable. And I believe that that's what compliance is trying to achieve, is make sure that businesses are strong. Getting through audit and seeing it as getting through audit is kind of the wrong mindset, but it is. People go through, they go and see you because they need a business plan for audit. They don't come and see you because they need to actually figure out how to map out their business and what does this look like. And I think it's really important that we create some kind of structure and framework for providers, especially now that it's not just NDIS, but it'll also be home care providers. If we're going to copy the NDIS model and put it in home care, then our most vulnerable people are going to be cared for, small and medium businesses who are expected to know how to run a business, create staff culture, understand their finances, and interplay with government funding, and not just government funding, but regulation and audit, that we need to have some better way of preparing them. And I don't think we have something at the moment. No. And so I think everything you said reinforces that.
I think the approach is right to force these operators to do a business plan, because they do get to the end of it, and I can see that it's had an impact on the way that they think, and I know they're more aware. But to me, this is endemic of a bigger issue with small business owners. We hear a lot about from the government about various incentives and, how do we get the small business sector to grow? Honestly, I've been talking to business owners for 25 years now. Educate the owners, and you will unleash the potential.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wonder, Warren,
it's not that people they're not passionate or they don't know what they're doing. There's just a lot going on, and just what I find with when we do plans, once you show people what to do and how to run their businesses and put some projections in place and show, this is the kind of marketing that you should do, they flourish. Rather than chasing their tail, they are able to really take their business to the next level because they know what they're doing.
Yeah. And I see that from my perspective with the audit process. I think them going through an audit process does educate them in the standards because they have to learn it. It makes it compulsory. And it's like, it's the government testing and measuring. If you don't test and measure something, people aren't going to do it. If we created a framework and didn't have an audit process, they wouldn't follow it. So I think that you need to have audits. And I'm not sure, I don't know how I feel about unregistered providers. I think I support it while there is the ability to be an unregistered provider. But I think people operating still homes, people operating any types of complex supports really should be going through an audit process, if nothing else, so that they're thinking about their business first and foremost, as opposed to getting stuck in the day-to-day and not realizing that the business is its own entity that lives and breathes and, is something that needs to be focused on in its own right outside of just the support that's being offered.
Absolutely, definitely.
I love that you said that people take on too much. I think walking before you run is something that I'm always trying to say to my clients as well. And I liked the idea of, not trying to think that social media is going to be the be all and end all. My personal opinion is that in the NDIS, it's all networking. It's all doing a really good job with one person, and everyone will hear about it and, creating from that perspective.
The most successful businesses that we've worked with are just great at having consistent quality care because it's so interlinked. I mean, the networks are set up. It's the staff. It's all the health. It's the support coordinators. It's the providers. Everybody's interlinked. So if you do a great job and you can leverage that, that's really where your gold mine is.
Yeah, I wonder if you could let us
that as well.
know a little bit.
And lastly, about finances, and I think finances is something I actually recently thought about actually going and becoming a profit first coach and trying to teach the profit first model because I'm outside of compliance. The next thing, once they understand the framework, is really understanding finances. I find that so many businesses don't even do the basic things like, haven't got enough cash flow for tax. And if you're talking about SIL, you can have a lag on payments for a really long time, and you can't just stop paying your staff. So being able to manage your cash flow is a challenge in any business, but I feel like there's just no literature out there that a small provider can go to really understand how to get started. I know in my businesses, managing cash flow is always a challenge. It's one of the things that as a business owner keeps you up at night. And if you can give them some certainty around, basic things like setting up a separate bank account for tax or for payroll or, figuring out even basic things, how much do you pay yourself versus, do you take profits versus do you take distributions versus all of those type of things. I'm lucky I have a really great accountant, but I don't know where I would be without that. And I had terrible accountants for, my first couple of businesses. And I know that those businesses weren't either as profitable as they could be. And my sale price that I got for them wasn't what it could be if I had have been clearer on the finances and really knew how to manage that better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on to the next question. We've talked about the different business models. How can NDIS providers ensure that their business model are sustainable and adaptable when there's changes in the NDIS landscape or market conditions?
Yeah, so look, it really, honestly, and it's like any business, part of what you do as a business owner is not just about managing the service, it's about managing the future of the business. So that means that you need to keep your eye on the ball. There's a lot of great information out there, like what you're doing, Tania, that educate people, that allow them to see what's coming. As I said, there's a lot of data out there on NDIS. So you need to look at it. And when we do the business plans, one thing that we always talk about is, who's on the board, who are your advisors. Actually do that. It doesn't need to be kind of every week, but maybe once a quarter, once every 6 months, get together with your trusted advisors and have a look at what the performance is. Look at the trends, measure as many things in your business as you can. So that's, it's hours delivered, it's non-billable time, it's average build out rates, it's average staff rates. Like as many things as you can possibly measure in your business that you can squeeze into your time, do it, because they will tell you the trends in the business a lot faster than your financial results. So if you're looking at your quarterly BAS, or if you're looking at your financial results 2 or 3 months after it happened, and for some reason profit's going down. Now, if you'd known that, let's say that your absenteeism from sick days was up for some particular reason, you would have picked that up 2 months before. And so it's really just about being right on the ball with everything that's going on in your business and keeping an eye on what's going on in the market. you probably don't have time as a provider to be reading articles for hours and hours each day. But, if you've got one or two sources, like a podcast, just listen to those things and just keep your eye on what's going on. Redo your business plan every year and just understand that the market is dynamic. It's changing all the time. And so part of your job is to keep an eye on what's going on in the market, because NDIS is one, it's one market, but there's countless stories of industries that have been completely caught off guard because they weren't keeping an eye on what's going on. Industries getting disrupted. So, if you're a taxi driver, for example, and you didn't see Uber coming, that radically changes the market. And the thing about NDIS is that it is, depending on government funding, if there's a policy change there, that could change everybody's business pretty quickly. So you need to kind of be on top and have some contingency plans of what you would do if things do change.
Yeah. I'm always surprised that in the business continuity plans that I'm auditing, that people don't have that as a risk. They don't have as a risk that the NDIS funding can change, because coming from
one for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, coming from running RTOs, we had funding in every state, and overnight a policy change can wipe out 50% of your business. And so you're always wanting to minimize those risks by having multiple income streams. So as an NDIS provider, to minimize policy changes, you could have, some people have multiple NDIS businesses set up that might do different things, so that, at the moment there's a lot of talk around support coordination potentially not continuing. So if you're only a support coordinator, maybe you can have a separate business that does support work, separate because of the conflict. But also you could look at other schemes. So a lot of my NDIS clients might not just be NDIS providers. They might do things for veteran affairs, for voluntary out-of-home care, whatever is state-specific for them. There's still a lot of other state funding buckets that they can leverage. Looking at the home care, the at-home supports that's coming up. There's lots, and then there's even just grants that you can get directly. A friend or a contact of mine got a grant to run a new type of respite for people with dementia, that she's the only person in Queensland that received the grant. But that just means it minimises the chance of the business model being impacted by one regulatory change. I think every government funded sector has seen those overnight sweeps that have affected their businesses in a huge way. And I think that anything you can do to minimise that is really wise.
That's all. Sure. And we're talking about NDIS providers today, but that's the case for any business. Things can change, and all of a sudden you're guaranteed, or certain revenue streams can dry up or drop, pretty quickly. If you don't have a plan in place, then you're really gonna hurt.
Yeah. And it's hard, because often we talk about being an expert in one thing, and then we go away and say, well, you need to have multiple income streams. So it can be really hard to figure out what that looks like. And I guess that's why having trusted advisors is so important, because they might be able to see things that you don't, or know clients who have done things with similar skill sets that you haven't thought of before. So this idea of not doing it alone is so very important.
Look, one thing I always say whenever I do a webinar presentation is that business is a team sport. And there's a lot of focus on employees, as there rightly should be. But the business owners that I've seen that have been most successful are really good at building their team at management level around them. And it's about having good advisors, accountant, financial, marketing, web design. There's a whole team of people around that really support the business owner. And the thing is, at the time where you need them, like if all of a sudden you need a lawyer for something, that's not the time to go and find one. You need to have someone there that you already know. So, it's a job that I think is very important to do along the way, and have those relationships in place so there's people there at times where you need them.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so many, all of those things can be so cost effective these days. Like when you talk about lawyers, we've used a number of lawyers that now there's memberships for lawyers. So I know Legal Vision we've used in the past. They are $1,000 a month for unlimited legal advice and contracts and documents. Or LawPath, who we've also used, is $100 a month for unlimited legal advice. and to rest assured for me to know that I've got a line item in my P&L that's locked that in so I know what the cost is, but also that if there is an issue, I can pick up the phone before it becomes any bigger to get advice early on. So I'm not waiting for the issue to be big and have a really large legal cost at that point. And it means that I can feel free to run that, ideas past them. And sometimes those things might be smaller. They might think that I'm silly, but it just gives me that reassurance to reduce those risks that I see in my business.
Absolutely. I mean, and whilst we're talking about that, so HR and IR particularly, because a lot of providers are managing big teams, and honestly, it's a whole world unto itself. So like a service like EmploySure, where you've got people there who you can call up and just tell me what to do here. If you're having performance issues or people leaving or absenteeism or whatever, like you need someone who knows what they're talking about to advise you on that, so you don't end up in hot water.
Yeah. And I guess the rise of the virtual world is that you can have an expert of team of people quite cost effectively. You can have a virtual CFO. You can have a virtual quality manager, which is what I do. You can have yourself come and do annual reviews of your business plan with you. There's more than enough resources of smart people out there that you don't need to do all of this stuff yourself. You can resource yourself and create that team quite cost effectively. Doesn't need to be hundreds of thousands of dollars at having a salary. And actually at the size of most NDIS businesses, it would make more sense with this shared services model rather than having a full-time person in some of those roles anyway.
Definitely, and it's flexible. So if something happened in the business and you needed to just kind of scale back expenses for a bit, then it's a lot easier to do that with an external provider than it is with an employee.
Yeah. Well, it's been a really great chat today. I think Paul's had some tech issues, so he has jumped off. But I have got my takeaways from today. So I really loved your 4 business models. So recapping that, we have the general supports, we have SIL providers, SDA providers, and the ancillary or specialized services. I love that we talked about the mistakes around both planning and operations. The main mistakes you see being around the lack of experience in business in general, thinking that build it and they will come. That they say build a service, people are just going to come along and sign up. That social media is the first place that you should go for trying to find participants. Walking before you can run and taking on too much too fast. And then finances, really understanding how to manage profit and cash flow and finances in your business. We then also, I loved your kind of, solutions to minimizing some of those risks or those problems around creating the trusted advisors, looking at trends. I loved your measurements. So you talked about staff rates, vacancy rates, hours delivered, and that really being the metric to a healthy business because your finance is 3 months in arrears sometimes. So using those as metrics more often to make sure that you're on the right track. And the idea of redoing your business plan every year and also keeping an eye on the market and looking for both opportunities and risks constantly as the market is evolving and growing and changing so rapidly. So they're my main takeaways. Anything else that you think that I've missed that's pertinent?
I guess to kind of sum that all up, as the provider, I think it's important that the business owners just need to understand what their role is. So you can do the day-to-day and run the business, and you can do that very well with happy clients. But if you have a more ambitious streak and you want something to grow into something bigger, then what we're talking about today is acting in a more strategic manner is something that you need to be doing. It doesn't need to be all day, every day, but there needs to be time every week where you step up from the day-to-day runnings of the business and take time out to do these kinds of things that are more strategic in nature and direct the future of the business. Because if you don't do that, then the potential growth that you could have is less likely to happen.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's absolutely right. So Warren, for anyone who wants to get in touch with you and learn more about what you do, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
So look, via our website, there's a whole range of ways of contacting. I'm more than happy to have a chat to people free of charge, and just to understand where they're at, see how business planning could help them. As I said, a lot of the time we are doing business plans for people who are going into audit, so they have that immediate need. But there's a great opportunity outside of the audit cycle to go back and look at your plan and really answer some of these questions as they are as they apply specifically to your business. And more than happy to give a discount if you just mentioned that you heard me on Tania Gomez
on the podcast. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today, Warren.
It's been great to have
with you again. But yes, and thank you all to our listeners. We look forward to everyone joining us again next week. Stay tuned and we'll talk again soon.
Good on you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Profitable NDIS Provider podcast with Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. We hope you found today's episode informative and valuable. If you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating, and share it with others who could benefit from our insights. Until next time, keep thriving.